So welcome to the next to last penultimate lecture in our Smart Clothes lecture series. This one is titled Your Future Smart Wristband by Picard, who's here. So let me just say a few words. I'm John Huth, and I'm the co-director of the Academic Ventures Program at Radcliffe Institute, and I'm also in the physics department at Harvard, so I wear many hats. The last in the Smart Clothes series, if you want to hear some more, is a lecture on April 22nd, that's a Tuesday, on loud clothing and noise-enhanced sensory motor function by James Collins of Boston University. I should mention that the Smart Clothes program started out with a symposium back in November where we had a number of people get together, like the creator of Google Glass, and we've been talking about spacesuits for use on Mars, and we'll hear something about wristbands that measure affect in people. It should be, this should be interesting, and the last lecture should also be interesting. So this is sponsored by the Academic Ventures Program of Radcliffe. It's mainly intended to be cross-disciplinary, so rather than some of the traditional institutes for advanced study that tend to focus on one area, our focus is, in a sense, defocused, if you like. It's cross-disciplinary, so we'd like to mix fields together where we think that some of the most interesting things are happening, where you look at the intersection of different areas, which is something I'm very interested in myself. Okay, well, it's my pleasure to introduce Roz, who is a professor of media arts and sciences, director of affective computing, not to be confused with effective computing, director of the Autism and Communication Technology Initiative, and co-director of the Things That Think Consortium at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she is also co-founder of Affectiva, Inc., which works to deliver technology to measure and communicate emotion. So I will tell you a little brief story about Affectiva. When I heard about it, I went online to their website, and there's a little demo, and if you're kind of curious, it's an interesting little demo. What it does is it measures your response to advertisements. So obviously this might be an interesting thing to advertisers or for people doing product placement. Is the company that's delivering your media actually effective or not? So what it does is you go to this website, you turn on the button that enables the little TV camera on your laptop, and then you sit there and you watch a TV commercial, and it stops and it starts thinking for a little bit and gives you some little interesting tidbits while it's crunching the numbers. And then it plays your response to the TV commercial, whether it's positive or negative. So if I'm smiling or my eyes widen up at something, then that's positive. If I frown and I kind of clench my teeth or something like that, that's not good. And so you can measure the response to the commercial. So I did this for a few commercials, and well, it was interesting. It discovered what I already thought I knew about myself, namely, I'll be really into a TV show, and then when the commercial comes on, I just zone out, okay? And indeed, when I looked at some of these commercials and I did the playback after the analysis, I was completely flatlined, according to Roz, this is a huge challenge for advertisers, people like me who over the years have just kind of flatlined, I guess. Anyway, Roz started out, or before finishing her doctorate, was a member of the technical staff at AT&T Bell Labs, where she developed new methods of image compression and analysis, and then joined the MIT Media Lab in 1991. And perhaps she's best known for creating this field of affective computing and writing a book by the same name, and really has been part of the core of her career has been all the offshoots of the concept of affective computing. And in addition to this issue of the Affectiva and this commercial response software, if you like, she's going to be talking about smart wristbands. I should mention something that I found fascinating from her website, from the Activa website, and that is that people smile on average 35 times a day. I'm not sure I do that. And apparently smiling is good for your health. It's good for your immune system. It's good for stress. And apparently if you force yourself to smile, it's just as good as smiling spontaneously, or at least a close approximation. So I'm notoriously bad about frowning for the camera, so I learned something very positive today from that. Roz has a huge number of patents, has been on many TV shows, a huge number of publications that she's been engaged in, and I just don't want to kind of go through that list because it would be far too tedious, and rather than go through the list, I'll just ask Roz to come up and give her talk. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. And I welcome I guess we have a group of Chinese who this is being translated to live upstairs, I understand also. So welcome to them as well. How many of you are wearing some kind of a smart wristband? There's so many out there right now. Raise your hand up high. Raise the one wearing the wrist if you do. Okay. Definitely less than a quarter, but I see quite a significant presence. I'm going to talk not about the ones that are available today so much as about what is coming. You might know today you can get motion information. That's the main thing. You can get motion and you can get heart rate, and sometimes you can get a few other things. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we've been working on that are really moving from cutting edge research into what I think will probably be some future products. Let me start with a story first, though. And this is a story of a time that I was testing our sensors. I happened to be trying to be efficient, so I decided I'd test 4. So you'll see 4 signals here. I put one on my left wrist, one on my right wrist, one on my left ankle, one on my right ankle. Now, how many of you, let me give you a little context here. How many of you have ever planned an event for somebody that you care a lot about? And the event means a lot to you to pull off this event in a special way, like a birthday party or a surprise or a big celebration. Yes, okay, so you know that feeling of you're trying to get everything just right before the event. And in this case, I was trying to prepare an outing to Six Flags for one of my sons for his birthday. Now, prior to this, I had tried to prepare the same outing once for a special celebration, and the whole thing had fallen through and gotten called off. So here it was, attempt number 2 to try to put this together. And you can imagine, how I was feeling right before. I'll show you the rest of the day in a moment, but first let me orient you a little bit here. What you see here in red is the skin conductance on my right wrist, and it's very high right here. And blue is on my left wrist, followed by my left leg and my right leg. That seems to switch which one's bigger as you go bottom half of the body. These are the hours on the bottom here, 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 a.m., whole day at Six Flags. And higher is more skin conductance, more sweat, more, in this case, more excitement. Now, I can't tell you if more excitement necessarily means good or bad in this particular case, and that's an important thing. As people try to measure emotion on the wrist, we don't have the perfect do you like me, do you not like me detector, all right? That's not there. Although Jocelyn, who should raise her hand sitting in the back row as the inventor of one of our first devices, raise your hand, Jocelyn, people want to talk to you, probably heard that as the most frequently asked question when we did one of our very first versions. You walk up to people at a party and they want to know if when you glowed, they liked you or not. Well, here when you glowed or got bigger, it was excitement. And here in particular, it was excitement of a ride that I dreaded wanting to ride that actually kind of made me sick. And then here, and that persists for a little while here. And then these other big peaks are the biggest, fastest roller coasters, which I managed to get the kids hooked on, which was thrilling and wonderful. Now, it was no surprise to me that my biggest peaks were on these biggest, fastest roller coasters, or especially on this ride that I don't want to talk about. But it was a surprise to me where my biggest peak of the day was. The biggest peak of the day was not the fastest, most intense, highest G-force, scary ride that people were shaking to go on. It was getting out the door in the morning with the kids. Now, those of you with kids probably, are more likely to laugh at this. Those of you without kids are like, huh? And in particular, it's not just the biggest peak of the day, but look at this huge asymmetry. The right is much higher than the left. Now, we did not expect that, all right? Now, think about this. I've said this is excitement, okay? You're excited or you're not, right? Why should one half of you be more excited than the other half? What's wrong with this? Was one sensor not working? Was something else making me sweat more on one side? What is this? This is rather mysterious. So I'm going to come back to this later because we think we have an explanation for it now. Now, what drove me to wear 4 bands to Six Flags? I'm not trying to embarrass my children. The 2 were hidden under the pants. The other 2 looked like Superman bands, and the people letting me on the rides thought that was cool. We were motivated to try to help understand people who could not tell us how they were feeling. In particular, many people with autism who are unable to put into words their feelings are often misunderstood. We hear of stories where they may be lying on the floor, looking like they're kind of in their own world, looking relaxed, like they're a little too out of it for the classroom. And the teacher's like, come on, get up off the floor, get with it. But when they see our data and they see that the kid's actually really overloaded, they think twice and say maybe he needs to stay on the floor for a little while. Or they'll see somebody jumping up and down and looking really hyperactive and a big scary bunch of movement for a quiet classroom and say, maybe somebody should calm down that kid. But we read out his internal state and say, wow, his state is so low. This kid needs 20 minutes on a trampoline before he gets up to a normal level. So we wanted to disambiguate what we were seeing on the outside with some measures from the inside. And so this data could help us start to do that. The data that I'm talking about is what we think of as arousal dimension of emotion, autonomic arousal. And we usually have thought of it as this unitary dimension, and now my thinking on that is changing. Valence is the other key dimension, and this is the one John was really referring to that we're measuring with facial expressions right now. In fact, this is a picture of Rana El-Kalyoubi, my co-founder of Affectiva. And Affectiva has been focused on reading the face. Now, I know Samsung has a camera on their wrist-worn device, and it is possible your wrist-worn device can read your face, but we're going to focus today on what is read through your skin, not with the camera. Although, I should say, we are now able to read with an ordinary webcam color changes under the surface of your skin that correspond not only to heart rate and respiration, but also to some other information as well. So that is that venue of what a webcam can pick up has changed from just what we can see with the naked eye to now things that we can see with the mathematics, but not with the naked eye. All right, and here we've built a variety of sensors over the years. This one's no longer available, the Q sensor at the top there. But let's go into what this is physiologically. And this is my one sort of small print, complicated slide. So bear with me here. I won't go through everything here. The key takeaways you need to know are autonomic nervous system. This is what's keeping your digestive system working, keeping your heart beating, keeping your breathing going. And it's very important that it's running without you having to tell it to run. It has 3 main branches, 2 that are very well known. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic are the best known. Sympathetic is the fight or flight response, but it's actually much more than that. It's known as fight or flight, but in fact, this is the response that goes up with anticipatory excitement. It also goes up with laughter. And we've measured, unfortunately, sort of reliably, goes down with PowerPoint presentations. So bring on the laughter in the Q&A. If you want to ask a question in the middle, I don't mind. It actually helps re-engage this. It could be positive, not just fight or flight. Parasympathetic, rest and digest, is what is most activated after you eat, helping kind of calm you and stimulating digestion. And not shown here is the enteric nervous system, which is amazing and deserves a lot more attention than people have given it. But we aren't able to measure it directly with what I'm talking about today, so we'll leave that off here. Now, with the wristband I'm wearing right now, I can measure heart rate. I can measure changes in heart rate that give me a good estimate of the parasympathetic system. As any of you who are signal processing geeks like me here will know that you can extract beat-to-beat intervals, do spectral analysis, and pull out from that some frequency information that gives you a good estimate of the vagal involvement here, the vagal break, we talk about it. Your heart right now is mostly resting, but you've got the brake on right now. Your natural heart is quite revved, and usually you put the brake on it to slow it down a little bit, like you're sitting here now doing. If you want to get your heart rate up really fast, you can withdraw the brake and it will shoot up, or you can step on the gas and it will shoot up. The sympathetic can make it go up. The withdrawal of the parasympathetic can make it go up. So when people say, oh, why don't you just measure heart rate with emotion? Well, it's kind of ambiguous, right? Heart rate goes up. I don't know if it's a change in this system or a change in this system. But if we estimate a particular frequency component range of its changes, we can estimate the component of this system, but we still can't get the component of this system. However, there's one organ not shown here that is purely innervated by the sympathetic nervous system, and that is very good at giving us an estimate of the sympathetic response. And that is the skin, right? The one we're all showing the most of here. So the skin has actually been studied for over 100 years. You might be familiar with the term galvanic skin response, skin potential. There are a whole bunch of different electrical measures that have been made on the skin over the years. They're traditionally made on the fingers or on the sole of the foot with wired boxes. And that means that most of the work that has been done in laboratory settings where people are sitting there holding their non-dominant hand still while the measure is being made, while their dominant hand might be engaged in using a mouse or filling out a questionnaire or doing some other task. Here's the device Jocelyn led the development of, that we called the Galvactivator, that grew brighter with your skin conductance. Later, we did versions that recorded the data on the wrist and the ankle, and the key breakthrough is to get out of the lab, to enable ourselves to get clinical quality data 24/7 as people left the lab. We had a lot of requests for this. We made this into a device called the Q sensor, and the one I'm wearing today is the Empatica E3P or E3 prime, and it's measuring heart rate, skin conductance, temperature, accelerometer, and some other Bluetooth-related information. Now, I mentioned the skin conductance. I mentioned sweat. When you sweat, you get more conductive. When you get wet, you get more conductive. But it's also the case, if this is a super simplified sweat gland, my student Elliot Hedman drew, it looks like a test tube, then when the sweat starts to be activated and it fills up, this is the surface of the skin and you measure electrically across this, the conductance will be higher across these 2 points than across these, but neither one feels sweaty. So even when you don't feel any sweat on the surface, you can have these significant changes in the level of this electrical signal. And that is the measure that can change very finely and give us insight into what's going on. Let's play an example from a young girl on the autism spectrum who has limited speaking ability here. She happens to be wearing the sensors, the wristband on her leg here. So we could see how she responds to the ball pit, to the zip line, to deep pressure, to whatever they're doing here. They're also doing some audio therapy with the speakers on her head. Now, over here, we see 3 things that can make skin conductance go up, and there's some ambiguity here, and I want to point this out too. This is not a highly specific signal. When we see it go up here, we don't know if it's due to her physical exertion getting on the swing, or due to her emotional arousal and excitement about getting on the swing, or due to cognitive load and motor planning, which for many people requires a lot of effort just to think about wiggling their toe. Working with some people with motor disorders or with Parkinson's, sometimes them just thinking about moving causes the signal to go up a lot, even when there's no other visible signs of change going on. So there's some ambiguity there that can make it go up. And then we see for her, this periodic swinging is associated with a nice interval of calm, a nice decaying exponential here. In fact, that decaying exponential is exactly what we saw during every PowerPoint presentation that Jocelyn and I recorded with the Galvactivator many years ago. Nice decay. People get excited when the new person comes on stage, but as you settle in, it doesn't look so good. Now, it doesn't mean you're not learning, it's just that you're not actively engaged. All right, so we see this nice calming stage. Any questions about her? Oh, we have another mic?
Yeah, except it's handheld.
I think I can make it work. Is this better? Now, that was a girl with an autism diagnosis who has trouble talking. All of us at one point had trouble talking. We were all infants. We had a baby boom in our lab years ago, and we had a number of people plops. We had cute little baby shoes, and then we found we could get it easier on the legs. And we found that we could see, for example, changes happen before you would see outward signs of the baby's distress. Here's a nice example of that. Here's the baby feeding. Here's the skin conductance. The EDA is electrodermal activity. Here's the accelerometer movement on the sensor. This is what's in the ActiWatch or the Fitbit or the Nike Feel Band, this movement down here. And as the baby's being fed, it looks like it sort of calmed a little bit. And then all of a sudden here in the middle of feeding, the signal goes up, 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 way up. And then at the peak, the baby starts crying. Isn't that interesting? If you could have seen it go up during the feeding before, you might have been able to think, maybe it's time to burp the baby or do something to alleviate something that could possibly be distress right here, leading to crying. And then in this case, I wish I'd heard a burp here, but didn't, and bouncing, cold neck, and some other experiments. The idea is that, well, as a pediatric GI specialist said when he came in to us, to meet with us, that they know from the moment you put food in your mouth, the timing that it takes to get to different organs in the body. Some people can't tell you where it hurts or when it starts to hurt. And sometimes the crying or the facial signs of distress, don't occur at exactly the same moment. They occur after the pain builds up for a while. So if you had some early indication of the discomfort coming on before it leads to a scream or a facial expression, it might be useful. Back to John's example, we've seen people who show no facial expressions, but you can definitely see them having some physiological response. And if you go back to those moments where they have those peak responses and you interview them about, hey, what was going on in your mind right here? We've gotten some very powerful stories at those times. That's work of Elliot Hedman in my lab. This is the first time I saw the wristband skin conductance data, and that's the amplitude here is more skin conductance, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for an MIT student. I don't know how it is with Harvard Radcliffe students, but there's a lot of studying, lots of activation with the studying, lab, homework, really huge activation here. To my surprise, the sleep, these blue sections, were some of the biggest peaks of the day. That you should be bugged by this, right? I mean, because I've just told you that higher is more activated, lower is more calm, huh? Sleep, isn't this backwards? We'll come explain this in a moment, or at least what we're thinking about it right now. And to the embarrassment of we MIT faculty, the low point of every day is the classroom activity. So with a simple wristband, you can get this not only for your classroom activity or your party data, but you can also start to look at individuals, and here are a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are trying to develop treatments for people who have been talking to us about these data. You can characterize an individual's response and find out if they're similar to or different from other individuals. Here are data from 5 children with the same autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Each one put on the sensor, in this case on an ankle at school at the start of the day, took it off before they went home. 60 days of data, it's about 3 months of school days here. Same days, same weather, same heat, same cold, same gym class, same lunch, same PE, same math, and so forth. But look at these 2 kids. Now, in 60 days of school, this kid only 2 days went above 1 on his average level for electrodermal response. This one never in 60 days went above 1. These 2 kids' average is above 1. They're very different, very, very different. Now, separate from our data, there are studies of conditions such as ADHD, suggesting that people with that condition tend to run a little bit lower, and being more active, getting more exercise could bump them up a little bit and help them. So if you start to see kind of where you are or where your kid is, you may find that something like this is useful for helping you understand when to get them a little bit more revved up or when they might be a little bit more better at performing when they're calmed down. Next, I'd like to tell you a story about one of the many surprises that we encountered while doing this work. It was the end of the semester, and one of the undergrads in my lab came to me and said, hey, Roz, I wonder if I could borrow a sensor over Christmas. My little brother has autism. He can't talk, and I want to see what's stressing him out. And I said, sure, here. Don't just take 1, take 2. In fact, take a soldering iron, because back then you had to keep repairing them a lot. And we fixed many a broken wire. So he took sensors that was in one of these little Domo sweatbands. I think the other was a little NBA sweatband. And to my surprise, he put them both on at the same time. Now, back then, I thought the two sides should tell you the same thing. So, this is just redundant, but it'll cancel motion artifacts, and that will be useful for our data analysis. Now, I'm sitting back in Boston looking at the data, my desk at MIT. And, each day I thought, okay, here's a kid with autism, but his autonomic data looked pretty typical. This was sleep, this was wake, this was something stressful, but it didn't look like anything was too out of whack. And I thought, okay, normal. It really doesn't look that any different from a kid without autism. And then I go to the next screen, and my jaw dropped. One side of his body, the signal went through the roof. The other side, I managed to convince myself there was a little blip at the same time, but honestly, it was just noise. There was nothing, no response there. I scratched my head. I was really bugged by this. I went and ran some experiments trying to figure out what could make the signal go that high, shorts, all kinds of electrical things. I'm an electrical engineer by training. Nothing explained it. And so finally I gave up and I called the student at home. I said, hey, how's your Christmas break going? Hey, sorry to bug you at home. Hey, any idea what happened to your little brother? And I gave him the date and the time. And he says, I don't know, I'll check the diary. I thought, diary? MIT students are so wonderful. He keeps a diary. Maybe he'll have, what are the odds? Dear God, please, he has some data on this. Well, he comes back and he says, what time? And I tell him, he goes, that was right before he had a seizure. Now, I didn't know anything about seizures at the time other than, what I learned in grade school, which turns out to be mostly wrong. And I called up another friend's dad. It's so wonderful being here in Cambridge, where everybody's got these amazing parents who are involved in brain surgery and stuff. And so next thing I know, I'm talking to Joe Madsen, brain surgeon over in neurology at Children's Hospital. Joe, is it possible that a person could have a huge autonomic response before a seizure? And he said, well, probably not as far in advance of it as you thought you saw, but maybe at the same time. And I sort of didn't have the courage to ask him, could it be on just one side? Because this was just a bizarre concept. But then he started explaining how sometimes for a seizure, people will have hair stand up on end on one side of their body. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe this is possible. So I told him the whole story. I gave him all the data. We then got through IRB approval, enrolled another 100 kids in the hospital who had simultaneously measured EEG, gold standard for seizures, ECG for electrocardiogram, and the EDA, electrodermal activity response, as well as video 24/7. And we saw things like this. This is the electrodermal response on the wrist. This is the accelerometer data, again, what you get in today's wristbands. These are hours, 24 hours here. And these red lines are what are called grand mal seizures or generalized tonic-clonic seizures. You see they're also accompanied by a huge amount of jerking movement right here. This is this boy's sleep peaks here, which, remember on the MIT student, those were the biggest peak of the day. So usually people are down, there's a big range of normal, but you saw those kids on average, tended to be around 1 at school. Well, look at these. These are popping up here to 20, 25, and I've seen them go even much higher than that. Very unusual response. So while we're spending a lot of time measuring emotional nuances down here, especially in advertising's way down here in the noise, we're suddenly finding these medical events that are just overwhelming. With that, we were able to take the data and build a seizure detector that combines the convulsive movement data with the autonomic data, and that's published in Epilepsia. And for those of you who haven't seen a seizure, this is a little simulated education video from Canada that I just want to play for you because it has some good advice in it.
Justin's having a seizure. He can choke. We need to stay calm. We need to turn him on his side. Here, I'll hold on to his leg. No, it can't be stopped. Quick, get me something soft to put under his head. Here, use this. We need to time and see how long the seizure lasts. If the seizure lasts more than 5 minutes or he has 2 in a row, we need to call an ambulance. Here, put this in his mouth. No, never put anything in anyone's mouth during a seizure. I think it's over. It's okay. You've just had a seizure. I know you're feeling tired, So let's just rest until you feel like you're ready to go home.
Okay, so what'd she say? If it lasts 5 minutes, or if you have 2 in a row, you call 911. 5 minutes or longer if they keep going is status epilepticus. Well, status epilepticus can be deadly, but it turns out that the #1 cause of death in epilepsy has a different name, and that is SUDEP, sudden unexplained death. Isn't it funny when an unexplanation gets a name because it's the most frequent explanation? All right, so the most frequent cause in children and adolescents, and now according to the 2012 IOM Institute of Medicine report, it's the #1 cause. The horrible, well, every death is a tragedy. The especially horrible stories you hear from parents when they find a loved one who had just a very short seizure, less than 5 minutes. They thought everything was fine. They come back later and everything's not fine. And they've lost their loved one. Now, nobody knows what causes this, but there's a candidate biomarker that is of interest right now. And I want to mention this because this is one of our really amazing, surprising findings that we never would have expected to get on the wrist. Here's our wrist response. And here's some points. So here's a point where the wrist responded with about 15, and this thing called PGES, which I'll explain to you in a moment, responded about 30. And what we're finding, we've got a lot more data expanding on this now and showing the same thing even way up to here, is that the bigger the response on the wrist, the longer this. And what is this? Here's brain waves over time. Here they're sort of going crazy during the seizure. After the seizure, they should go back to normal, but sometimes they go flat. And when they go flat, it's called postictal generalized EEG suppression, or PGES. The longer they go flat, the worse we think it is. Now, people don't like to walk around wearing an EEG. I've done it here in Harvard Square. You know, if you paint your hair a little purple, people don't seem to mind a few EEGs in your hair. But honestly, most people don't like to walk around doing that. The wristband is a great correlate. Not so much down here, but as we go up, it's a hugely correlated with this. So we've published this in Neurology. We've also shown that it's what we're finding on the wrist with this little bit of sweat. Okay, again, this is kind of bizarre if you think about it. Bigger this sweat response on the wrist, not only the longer the brainwave suppression, but also the, I mentioned the vagal withdrawal, the parasympathetic response. We're finding that that vagal brake is basically disabled. So it's as if somebody has stuck a brick on the accelerator, you know, in your car and disabled the brake. Okay, this is not good, right? You want these two to correct for each other. They're both going in the bad direction, and the wristband is a cue to that now. So the wristband of the future, I think, can provide some very significant medical insight, as well as things like, are you moving, and is your heart rate in a low or high resting range? Now, why look at left and right, and when do we need to do that? I mentioned that we're picking up on sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic system sending signals out. How many of you have heard of the amygdala in the brain? A lot of people have now, okay, so you studied emotion. So you may have also heard that you have 2 amygdala. You have a right one and a left one, unless you've had one removed. And in studies with brain imaging, sometimes they see one side light up more than the other with certain kinds of tasks. In particular, for strongly right-handed people, the right one tends to be more associated and larger with social phobia, with fear, with threat, with negative stimuli, while the left one can change with both positive and negative stimuli. Now, separate from that, and quite interesting, from the epilepsy literature, we know that if you stick an electrode on the left amygdala and you give it a little bit of a jolt, that the person wearing a skin conductance sensor on the left and the right hand will have a huge left skin conductance response. And same for several other limbic regions of the brain. These are, we think of as some of the core parts of the brain involved in emotion, the anterior hippocampus, posterior hippocampus, and the cingulate. When they're on the left side, they give a big left skin conductance response. These 2 cortical regions give equal left and right skin conductance responses. Same thing on the right side. Stimulate the right amygdala, you get a big right skin conductance response and almost no left. So things that you might expect to involve more of the right amygdala, you might also expect to have more right skin conductance, provided you've controlled for the other contralateral motion influences and the cortical contributing to both side influences. So just to recap, these structures in particular which are particularly important for emotion, pain, fear, phobias, depression, sadness, anxiety, are showing some signs of this laterality, which are quite interesting. Now, if you think about this, it's a little bit bizarre. Just point out something here. When we go back, when I said we're getting a big, okay, here we've got electrodes on the scalp. The scalp is reading nothing. The scalp is flat. The wrist is reading something huge. Okay? The longer the scalp is flat, the bigger the wrist response. Now, what's going on? At first, we couldn't explain this because we thought, oh, the whole brain's shutting down. But what's shutting down is the electrical activity near the scalp. The stuff near the scalp is the cortex. The stuff deeper down can be firing like crazy, and the stuff on the surface is missing it. Why can we pick up deep brain signals on the wrist that we can't pick up on the scalp? Right? This is pretty bizarre. Well, I was puzzling over this one day down at Baylor, and this doctor comes up to me afterwards. She goes, Roz, it's easy. It's Medicine 101. Well, Medicine 101, I'm an electrical engineer. I didn't have Medicine 101. So in Medicine 101, we learned and from embryonic form, we're made of 3 kinds of tissue. One of those is the ectoderm. From the very beginning, the skin and the tissue used to form the brain and the spinal column and all were together and mapping. And as we developed, they continued to develop together. So it's no surprise that some deep brain activity would show up in various places on the skin. That a wrist sensor or a leg sensor might pick up some deep brain activity that we might miss even with an EEG. Thus, we start to see with a wristband interesting things like the right side going up more than the left in anticipation of a flu shot. I don't know if you've ever seen the kid jerk before the needle even hits them. You know, sometimes the anticipation responses hurts a little bit more. It's a little more fearsome. Or this person in a business meeting with people that she works with regularly versus a very top potential business deal partner. And you see, moments apart, the right going much higher, the left getting up a bit here too, and then as soon as the meeting ends, it going back to normal. So you can start to segment your day and see which events cause which kinds of response, and read not only the amplitude, but the asymmetry. We've also seen this data look quite interesting during sleep, where typically it alternates in sleep stages between the 2 sides, but you can have huge asymmetry. In this case, it was after somebody died. That was a loved one for this person. And what we are now getting ready to do is do a large-scale depression study to look at this data. Peter Weinstock at Children's Hospital describes emotion as the 4th vital sign. We're also working back to those sleep peaks. Okay, remember I said, why on earth is sleep having the biggest peak of the day? That really doesn't make sense. And honestly, we don't have the full answer yet. We did notice that the biggest peaks are during stage 2 or stage 3, during slow wave sleep. They're not during REM. Originally, we thought maybe it was when you're dreaming and the monsters are chasing you in your sleep or something. Bob Stickgold, sleep expert, told me you can dream during all stages. He's woken people up during all of them. He's woken them up when their heart is pounding and they're sweating and said, tell me about your dream. They're like, oh, I was just relaxing reading the paper. Or he wakes them up when they're very calm and this monster was chasing me. So sometimes the physiology of your body during sleep is decoupled and behaves in different ways than it does when you're awake. There are a lot of surprises during sleep. So many things we thought were true seem to be flipped around during sleep. But one thing we found very consistently across large numbers of participants, now over 100, I think, is this high-frequency peaking during non-REM sleep. Here's an example of it before sleep and then during sleep for a kid with autism. And the before sleep in this case corresponded to the kid saying, the next morning he says, I was very stressed trying to fall asleep. I was really anxious about it because I had all these electrodes on my head and I didn't like that. So we could see some of that arousal that sometimes accompanies an insomnia with this data. And in a small study showed that related to quality of sleep is reported by parents in autism spectrum disorders. But what are these peaks that were dubbed storms in the 60s when they were first observed? We still don't know exactly, but we're getting a very interesting new set of clues. And I think one possible key explanation is the relation to memory formation. Remember how activated the signal was during problem sets and studying and intense concentration and thinking. Well, the sleep researchers give people a task to learn before sleep, and they test you on it when you wake up. It's this classic visual discrimination task. And they use it as a test of memory consolidation. You've got to answer whether it's a T or an L and whether this is horizontal or vertical. And they look at your response timing, and they have this standard method for figuring out if you're getting better at this or worse at this. And the thing that they've measured in the past that determined if people did better or not was if people got more than 6 hours of sleep, and if they got more REM in the first quadrant of the night, more slow wave sleep in the first quadrant of the night, and more REM in the last quadrant of the night. If you did that, then you performed better. So those are measures based on EEG and length of sleep. When we took those measures based on EEG, I'll throw them into the all bucket here, and we compare them to measures based on the skin conductance, the electrodermal activity talked about here, versus the accelerometer, what you get in today's field bands and Fitbits and so forth, versus a combination of these. And we ran several different machine learning models. I never trust just one. So here we ran 6, and we looked to see if there was any consistency in what they found was best, and there was huge consistency. In all of the models, the skin conductance, the electrodermal response that, again, was most activated during wake with memory and attention, and is most activated during sleep with the non-REM sleep, was showing the strongest prediction of performance improvement on the memory task, on the memory consolidation task. I won't go into all the detail here. You can grab all of I'll put up a URL at the end with all of our papers online, but here's just another way of looking at all the data. And again, the electrodermal activity is coming out on top. In one case, just to show you it's not always perfect, the EDA and the accelerometer did slightly better. All right, let me end with one more story, and then we'll go into some Q&A. I like this example. I started with autism. I'm going to end with an example. This is from a young adult with autism who was giving a speech one night. She had a 3-minute talk, and she was stressed about it. And she said, "Could I borrow one of your wristbands to measure myself during my talk?" And I said, "Sure." And then I disappeared. I came back after the event. But the event was supposed to start at 8, and it got delayed. And she learned that it was going to be delayed. Now, people with autism, by and large, they experience a lot of anxiety and stress. And if you can provide more certainty in their life, it really helps. So having a schedule and sticking to it helps. Changing the schedule at the last minute does not help. It can make things much worse. And when the schedule changed, she started pacing, right? And so she's pacing back and forth. Now her boyfriend, or male friend, was sitting there bothered by the pacing, and he says to her, "Stop pacing." So she stops pacing, and she starts stimming. I asked her what she meant by that. She said, I kind of did this flapping, rocking stuff. Then the event started. She gave her 3-minute talk, and then it was downhill from there, punctuated by some bad audio microphone events, sensory sound sensitivities, very unpleasant. After the event, her friend and I were looking at the data. She wanted to show it to us. And the first words spoken were by him. He looked at the timestamps that we had next to the different events, and he says, "I'm not going to tell you to stop pacing anymore." The next morning, I saw the two of them before another event. She was pacing, and this time he was sitting there happily typing and letting her pace. Now, this is not to say that pacing calms everybody down, right? Some people, repetitive movement can be very calming, some not. But if you find that you can show with your own personal sensor that something is regularly associated with calming or regularly associated with certain kinds of anxiety, or perhaps even predictive of better sleep or worse seizures or other events, then this can be a very powerful tool in your life to give you better insight. And not just insight, but the ability to share that insight with other people in an objective form that can get them off your back too, right? Or get them on your side, helping you with what happens. So I've taken you on a bit of a whirlwind of some things we've been working on, from sensors that can be worn on the wrist or ankle for people who can't speak, which was all of us at one point, to some surprises such as finding seizures in the data, some kind of humbling findings, and surprises that sleep could be so big. Maybe it has something to do with that memory consolidation, maybe not, we might be wrong, we're still learning, but we're finding some really intriguing stuff there. And now starting to map some of the deep brain structures that map onto different parts of the body, showing that arousal, just measured in one point, is only part of the story. Throughout this whole process, there have been a huge number of surprises in our work. I continue to be wrong, be corrected, learn new things, and discover new things. And whatever the future wristband that you have holds, I assure you it will bring even more surprises. Thank you very much, and here's some URLs.
So we have some time for questions, and do you want to just take them? I think the only issue would be if you could repeat the question so we get it on audio. That would be
I'll
great.
do that, and if I forget, just remind me. Thank you. And the orange?
Yeah. Have you done any work with wristbands on people who are schizophrenic?
I was just meeting with some people about that today, and I was at a meeting a few weeks ago looking at that. There is a huge literature on electrodermal activity and schizophrenia. It's mostly studied in the lab, but they have found subtypes with extreme asymmetry. And I have not personally done any of those studies, but I'd be very interested if you know people doing good studies in that area to work with you. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So one of the things you mentioned was the difficulty in correlating an activity with the skin response, like particularly if you give someone a sensor to wear for 24 hours. And I'm wondering if you have, if there are any ways that you've found to ease that logging process so that you can correlate over a long amount of time.
Yes, I was kicking myself on the way over here. I meant to stick in slides of my student Yadid Eisenberg's work. If you go here and look for Yadid, Y-A-D-I-D, you'll see some of the technology that we've built to make it easier to get contextual information in. So he's made a tool called Feel, F-E-E-L. It works on Android devices right now, and that allows you to align the contextual information, your calendar, GPS coordinates, that we showed in a study helped people much better with annotating what led to their peak events.
How far are we from seeing this in a commercial product?
How far are we from seeing this in the commercial product? Well, you can buy commercial devices today, like the one I mentioned, this Empatica one, that will give you this data. What you still sort of need is a grad student or somebody who can process signals to help out with it, which is not commercially available yet. Maybe there's a business there. I'm working with some people on trying to extract and make the epilepsy parts easier for people to have in that space, and very interested in how we can take more and more of the research findings and get them to where they have real significant impact on people. But there's still a lot of work to do to get there.
Earlier, you had talked about the difference between wrists and legs, and I was just wondering if you could say, was there any data that was captured by the legs that was somehow not captured by the wrists? And are there other areas that you would like to have? Maybe it's a necklace or other places in the body that would be valuable to measure these responses.
We still have a lot to figure out about the different locations. There are some other differences we've found. We have found, for example, that the asymmetry in the wrists doesn't always hold in the legs. There is asymmetry in the legs, but it's not as pronounced. It seems to be the case that a signal that may go to only one side, the upper half, gets to both as we go down. There have also been studies on the sternum, the forehead, the arms, the legs. If you go to some of our publications and look in the references in the background, we talk about those studies there where people have compared a lot of different sites, but mostly they were just looking for correlations during awake and arousing tasks, stimuli, sounds and sights. What we find is during things like sleep, sometimes the things that are correlated during wake decouple and behave differently. So we see very different behavior on the sternum during sleep and on the palm and on the wrists during sleep, and yet the legs can be more similar to the wrist. But lots still needs to be discovered there. Yes?
You mentioned you're about to start long-term studies on depression, and I'm just wondering how it's going to be helpful, or how you expect it to be helpful for depression studies.
In depression, there have not been objective measures, right? And actually, in most areas that look at emotion or emotion-related disorders, they rely on questionnaires or they rely on observations, which are valuable. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying throw those out. But we also know that they're biased by so many other factors. And I'm thinking of like an example where I was at this retreat called Autreat. It's organized by and for people on the autism spectrum, and they let in some geeks like me who they call cousins. And we were sitting around a table having a conversation with everybody there had a diagnosis except me. And it felt like any conversation at MIT among friends because everybody actually was doing eye contact and quite comfortable with each other. And at one point, one of the adults turns and she looks at me and she says, "I'm going to be reevaluated soon. How autistic should I act?" Because we can all kind of act a little, you can kind of keep away the eye contact. You know what to do, right? Because you can live it, you can turn it on and off, and to some extent, some people can, some people can't. But the point is, people want services, they want help, but their needs vary, right? And they can have more intense needs or less needs. And the questionnaire, the observations are like trying to understand, the entire symphony by sampling 5 notes. We're just not really getting it. The sensor data lets us get much more of what's really going on and start to see how much is the sleep disrupted, how much is the activity disrupted, how much is the autonomic disrupted, when is it disrupted? Are these just little moments at the end of the day when they're encountering their spouse, or are these all day long anxiety issues, right? And so that's stuff the questionnaires just don't give you. Even when you use experience sampling, you interrupt them with your cell phone 10 or 15 times a day, and we've done it up to 50 times a day. And it's just very different. So we think we're gonna get complementary information. We don't know yet what we get. We have some hypotheses, but we'll mine the data and see. In the back, yes.
I can just keep going.
Thank you.
So I was wondering if you've thought of using this data because you get it in real time, right?
Yes.
Have you thought of using it with some sort of a feedback system?
Yes, have we thought of using the data real time with feedback? Yes, definitely. Definitely for seizures, because people want an alert. They want to often people lose consciousness. They want to summon somebody nearby to help them. Or they might want to alert people nearby with how to treat them, right? Or whether or not to call 911 in some cases. Yes, we want to put real-time feedback and alert in, and I'm working on a version that will do that.
I'm wondering, maybe you could just use it, like maybe there's a certain level that you learn the best in, right? So you use it for optimizing. We saw that during homework there was sort of an intermediate level. Maybe you could use it to optimize learning.
I would love to see people do more learning studies about optimizing their experience. I'll just say I don't expect to find a single level that's optimum for learning for everybody. I would expect, however, to find an interaction between what works for you and topics you love versus don't love. Like there's some topics where it's like I almost need to be on the treadmill to pay attention to that topic. There are other topics where I need to get very calm to really get into the topic. I love the topic, but I want to shut out all distractions. So the set point can be different depending upon an interaction between your motivation for the topic and the demands cognitively and affectively. Mm-hmm.
I know we didn't touch on the facial aspects, but has there been any correlation that you've noticed or read about between eye movement and some of the other findings that you had regarding the electrical responses in the skin, what have you?
The correlation between the eye movement and the skin conductance responses. There are studies on the pupil dilation, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about like rapid eye movement or with
Either with eye movement with your horizontal, vertical, different positioning.
okay, people looking different places.
There's been theories
yeah.
about accessing audio memory or visual memory by eye movement.
Interesting. Yeah, like looking up when you're trying to remember something.
Discomfort by looking down. I was just wondering if there's any correlation between the work that you've done.
I haven't seen one, but we also haven't looked for it. If anybody knows of any studies on that, I'd be curious. It's an interesting question. Thank you. Orange, yes? Oh, good. Here comes another mic.
It would seem to me, based on what we've just seen, that the skin conductivity would be a better way of approaching sleep apnea than wiring people up the way they do now.
Apnea is complicated. My understanding is they, like the gold standard measures of sleep apnea, can say that you have terrible sleep, but you feel great the next day, or you can feel terrible the next day, but not have any of these measures. It's very complicated. We have looked at the EDA during apnea, and there was not a clear, simple, like one would expect during sleep, sympathetic kick with it. It was not there to the eye. It's possible, and this was about a dozen people that we looked at. It's possible that a more thorough look could find something there with it. I would probably, I would want to look at it now with this band that can give me more information than that. I think we get very nice heart rate variability during sleep with this, so I would look at the juxtaposition. Mm-hmm.
So you touched a little bit about the idea of using, being able to, talking about this idea of being able to do this real time, being able to get this data as the person, the patient or whoever experiencing it. Have you had any experiences where doing monitoring that, seeing that the actual getting the real time actually taints future data? Because, for example, a heightened response and knowing they're getting a heightened response means that they can actually get a less of a response. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Basically, the people,
biofeedback.
Yeah, the people are being told they're too stressed out, and then they get even more stressed out.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the case that. So the first time I remember using this actually with a game with my students, and by the way, this signal's used a lot in lie detection too. So because the fight or flight response is very pure there. And I remember my students, they just put it on me, and they're like, okay, now's our chance to ask her whatever we want. And the mere thought of what they would ask me made me go up. And then seeing myself go up at the mere thought of it made me go up even more, right? Because I'm sort of doubly embarrassed. They didn't even have to ask anything, just myself, my own imagination. So people can do that. I remember Jerry Letvin years ago saying that he actually had a patient who he used, not the kind we use, but a similar but highly responsive kind on the palm. And she went into a state of hyperhidrosis where she couldn't stop sweating. So that's the most severe, serious situation. I have never seen that in all my years of dealing with this, but that's Jerry's warning of that is stuck in my mind as something to watch out for. Right there, the body can have their positive feedback loops that are actually negative in their effect on you because they spiral out of control. In the very back, in the plaid.
Do you use any of the other sensors on your smart wristband, like the heart rate sensor or the temperature sensor, to try to cancel out skin conductance increases due to like physical exertion or like temperature overheating? And can you do that reliably?
Yes, we use the temperature, we use the heart rate variability, we use the motion, we use the other information to interpret the skin conductance. As you saw, it's not specific. The temperature turns out to be especially useful for things like context. When you look at your calendar and you align it with your skin conductance, pretty much every time you go from one meeting to another, or in a taxi, or in the subway, or in the hallway from the room, there's a slight temperature change. And I was joking with my student that we could build a lateness detector just based on looking at when the temperature drop happens relative to the onset times of the meeting. The person who's chronically 10 minutes late has the drop, 10 minutes after each of these events. We use that to figure out where you really were during the day, right? When I go back and label the data, that is very useful information. Temperature is also interesting for vasoconstriction. Some doctors we're working with who are trying to help people with addicts, in particular cocaine users, they'll have the vasoconstriction, they'll have the sympathetic surge, they'll have movement with it. We look at the triad of measures there to get that. We haven't had the good heart rate data until recently in the ambulatory form, so we have less of that for me to describe more examples of. But where we do have it now, it's looking really nice, and I know that's going to help us get a more complete picture of several things that are of interest. Yep.
Thanks. I had a couple of questions, but they've already been answered. But I wanted to add an additional one, and that is there's a commercial blood pressure sensor, which is on the market. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you knew how that works, because it's obviously not an electrical impulse. Do you know how that operates?
There are a bunch on the market, and I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Well, the one I know is something that's sold by Apple. But I presume it's not electrical impulses. Because it's measuring your pulse and the blood pressure.
I
And
won't
if
go
there's
into
potential for
yeah, I'm not going to
doing
go into
other
technical
things
detail here, but
and
let me
other
point you, if
measurements.
you're interested in that, to two things. And in addition to the constricting kind, which can do damage over time, so you don't want to use those continuously, there are ways to take the photoplethysmograph signal, PPG, we call it, and read some measures between the waves in there that can give you estimates related to blood pressure. So I don't know the specific one you're thinking of, but there is, I know there's some coming out in the market soon that have that approach to it. You can read about them in Google Patents.
The sensory motors are response left-right wired. So when I was seeing the amygdala left-right response, is that left-right also wired, cross-wired, or no?
No, it's really surprising. So the motor is contralateral. You to move my right hand, it's left motor cortex, and the left motor cortex activation, according to the folks who've mapped this, should elicit right skin conductance. However, right amygdala activation elicits right skin conductance. So some of these subcortical structures map ipsilaterally to the same side, while some of the other structures map contralaterally, and some of the cortical map to both sides. So it's a complicated story. And when you're doing a study and you're looking at the outcome, you need to think about everything that's being affected, not just the thing that you're looking at.
That's amazing, actually. That goes back to that model of the embryo in some sense.
Yeah, there are a lot of mapping still to be discovered, lots of surprises still to be learned.
Fascinating. Okay, well, please thank Roz again.